things here. All right, so let's see if I can keep this straight. Screen share, desktop, that sounds good. Share screen. Okay. So this is straight out of your textbook, obviously. I'm on the e-text here. So Microsoft Windows 8 goes on sale in October. And this is kind of how it unrolled in reality with their pricing. So price discrimination was the deal of doing what, to whom, and what, why, Jake?
Charging different prices to different people for the same good.
Good, charging different prices to different people for the same good. And for Microsoft, we can kind of look at this picture and see what they did. So if you bought the full version from Microsoft, $250. Let's see. Oh, is Hunzy on or somebody's on the phone? Oh, is that you, Brennan? Bennett? I can mute everybody, but Brennan? Brennan?
This is Hunzy.
Ah, that is you. Okay. So can you mute your microphone? Were you not able to get on for video, or are you on somewhere else?
Let me see.
Oh, that's Hunzy. Yeah, you got to have your video in order to get credit. Or Hunzy, did you just join us?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. In order to get credit, remember you have to keep your video on.
Right.
Okay. And then just go ahead. You can mute your microphone. All right, so $250 full version, $199 for an upgrade. So if you had Windows 7, then you can just upgrade it. Full from Amazon, $162. So the Amazon shoppers. OEM, I'm not even sure what the heck. Anybody know what that means? Is that I mean, OEM usually means that it's the factory retailer, like somebody who it's Microsoft quality or it's Microsoft stuff, but it's a reseller of Microsoft products, I think is what OEM, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but anybody know? I think that's what that is. So $150, and then if you're a student discount, right? $69. So from that, they kind of show the demand curve and what they're doing. And so the belief is that if they didn't offer the discount, they wouldn't sell as many of the Windows product. Now, I don't really believe that completely. What might go on if they didn't have, if their pricing scheme wasn't this? Do you think, why do you think I'd say that I don't believe that they might just not only sell this amount? People still need it, right? And so there's probably some students. Do you think there's some students out there that would be willing to pay the $250? There's some, right? But they're getting it for $70. And so, again, this is just to kind of motivate the thought process. But this price discrimination stuff is not always easy to figure out. So, and it's not always a perfect silver bullet that you know that there's students that won't pay that, right? Or how many students exist out there that would or wouldn't pay it? So without being able to distinguish them, there's still a little bit of a guessing game going on. But what we see is that the consumer surplus is being kind of chewed away at by the other groups. So if they were pricing it at $70, all of these people would buy it too, right? All the people that paid more, obviously, right? That's the difference between what we're willing to pay and what we actually pay. So the consumer surplus area in a competitive market, perhaps, or some sort of competition might be this area. And we see what we saw on Monday, and I guess we started this on Friday too, that the consumer surplus area, I guess, just kind of keeps getting eaten away a little bit, right? So part of what the monopoly is able to do is to try to come up with some creative ways to get people to pay a little bit more than what they were before. All right, so So is Microsoft a monopoly? We've got this is just right out of the book, so they give you the answers here. So we learned last time, that was on Friday, I think, 87% of the market, almost 100% of the non-Apple market. So if we take Apple out of the picture, Microsoft has pretty much 100% market share. James, another point gone. Okay, remember to put your gizmos away. James is giving us a reminder that you will lose points if you don't separate yourself from your gizmo during class. All right. So is it a natural monopoly or legal monopoly? We haven't talked about, that's part of what today's lecture is on natural monopolies or a legal monopoly. So what is Microsoft? Well, they've got these large fixed costs and almost zero marginal costs. So it has a big downward sloping long-run average cost curve, which was our economies of scale definition. What's this zero marginal cost business? Why did they say that? In this context, what does it mean? How would you describe Microsoft having zero or almost zero marginal cost? Okay, go for it, Ike.
But yes, the product that they're making is selling at such a high price compared to the cost of making it that it's producing like next unit.
Okay, so right, that's the good as far as the cost of the next unit they're making doesn't really cost them anything. But let's drill down a little bit deeper. But bridge off of that, why? Well, what's their product? Think about that.
They don't have to manufacture it. They're just selling copies of it.
Yeah, so they just have copies of it. How do they, now one issue would be in terms of marginal cost, you know, what would be the marginal cost of this physical textbook for Pearson to deploy? If they had already produced 100,000 of them and they're sitting in a warehouse, that cost is gone, right? They have an inventory of books. So now what is the marginal cost to Pearson of getting these books out of inventory? Shipping, right. So what is the marginal cost for Microsoft of shipping the operating system? Similar to the e-text of why we've seen such a movement to e-text, right? So these guys have a lot of cost involved with potentially shipping, production, blah, blah, blah. But similar to what Microsoft's doing here, once the book is produced and it's made and you've got this little e-reader thing that they use, once that's all taken care of, to actually plug in this book versus another book, it's cost-free, basically, right? And even the distribution of it is cost-free because you guys go on, register for the book, buy it online, boom, it's downloaded, you register. All of that's just programming that they've already paid programmers for. There is not a physical human being that is taking your order, so to speak, like in the old days with a phone order, right? Nobody is physically doing it. It's all machine-driven. Everything's machine-driven. And that's changed the economics of things because now the marginal cost is zero for that product, basically. It's pennies. It's very little. There's, of course, some little cost that must be associated with it to monitor and police and make sure somebody who got screwed, that this would never happen to you guys, I'm sure that somehow the My Econ Lab's not working quite properly, you know, that they have to pick up the phone and do customer service. There's cost involved with that, right? So there is some cost, but for the most part, it's very low relative to the price you're selling it at. And that drives this economies of scale concept. All right, so those large costs up front, large fixed costs of actually getting the program to work and do the things, that's what is creating the barrier to entry. All right, and then, okay, just the last one, I guess, was just on the Windows license for all the same. Okay, any questions or comments there? Price discrimination. Totally legal, as long as you're not doing it according to the protected classes. And so we have lots of examples of that we go through. Question? Oh, just unmuted somehow. Okay. All right, so that leads us into this idea of that was kind of a natural barrier to entry. What was the other type of barrier to entry? What was another barrier? Let's see, am I still screen sharing? Oh, no. Okay. What was the other ways that we could get a barrier to entry? Government protection, yes. So government somehow having some protection or regulation, right? So that's where I want to start off with today and get into this regulation stuff. All right. Now, how many of you how many of you ended up watching the little debate on Monday? Oh wow, a lot more of you did, right? So maybe you peeked in for just part of it, or how many of you watched kind of all of it, basically? Got sucked in, looking for some fireworks. It's kind of the latest craze in reality TV, basically, right? Having the Donald and Hillary toe-to-toe. All right, so one of the things that was brought up by Donald in a pretty strong way was regulation. What did he tell Hillary during the debate in terms of regulation?
She's gonna drive something.
Okay, so he was thinking we've got too much regulation already, and she's planning to bring more, was the accusation. And did Hillary really rebut that? I don't think so. I don't remember she really, coming out and saying, no, that's not me. You've got me all wrong. You don't understand me. I think that is part of what her, where she was going with that. So, regulation, just to kind of think about some of the tips of that. What is regulation? If I was asking you to define it, what are some of the things you'd say about it? What is it? Restrictions, good. So that would be some sort of thing. It's a restriction. And I like that. Anytime what we learned in our utility chapter, for instance, and in other places, is whenever it's a restriction, has that increased our utility or decreased it for utility? Just thinking in terms of happiness. We can think about firms being happy too, but they get happy because of profits usually. But when there's a restriction put into place, does that increase your personal happiness or decrease it? Decrease it, right? So it limits choice. And so in theory, more choices lead to more possibilities and a higher level of happiness. As a side note to that, there are some economic studies that challenge that say having fewer choices in some cases under some circumstances makes us happier. I just happened to hear a recent study in the last 2 to 3 weeks is why it came to mind, is that they did some things where there was a market study on of like Gatorade or something. It wasn't Gatorade, but some sort of Powerade or drink thing or some sort of food product. And they had people come up on one set of circumstances, and there was 25 choices. And then they surveyed them at the checkout line, something to do with their happiness about what they felt, or did you end up buying the product or something? How did you feel about the product? And then they did the same experiment with the same product, but only gave them 3 choices. And what they determined is that people came away feeling better about it when they only had 3 choices as opposed to like 25 choices. And so under those set of circumstances, there was a little bit of evidence that more choice isn't necessarily better. That's completely different, though, than this regulation set of circumstances. But I thought I would throw that out there, that there is some evidence out there that shows that more choices doesn't always mean more happiness in every set of circumstances. All right, so restrictions on choices available. If you want to go hire somebody, 14-year-olds are off the table, right? There's a regulation that says you got to be at least 16 years of age, and if you're working in a restaurant where you're running the spinning blade for carving up some ham, how old do you got to be for that? Anybody know? 18. You got to be 18 to run the slicer. They don't want, they trying to protect that. So that's another regulation. In the old days, you could have your 16-year-old slice up the meats, but apparently too many fingers or trips to the ER or whatever it was, and now there's laws on the books that restrict some of those choices. So some of those might be just fine, and others might lead to circumstances. So what about the restrictions? So restrictions on choices available, in general, our economic theory says a decrease in happiness with less choices. And I should put individual happiness. Whoever the person who's getting the restriction, it's their happiness I'm thinking about. Because from a policy standpoint, hopefully somebody else's happiness is served, like the kid who didn't lose his finger. Like he's happier that maybe that's gone. Of course, he didn't know whether he was going to lose a finger or not, and so maybe he's not happy that he doesn't get to run the slicer, which is kind of fun. It's kind of cool, and you've got a machine to work. But that's what our economic theory says. Now, from a company standpoint, then, what does that do if there's an increase in rules, regulation, rules? What happens to cost? That goes up. Very unlikely that it leads to a decrease in cost. Now, that answer, again, might depend. So, for example, if you have a company that is currently polluting the environment, it might be that your little smokestack here, if the government says you can't do that anymore, you might be able to open up a new plant, a new streamline, let's call it a smaller smokestack with just little piddles coming out now, compared to the big billows of pollution coming out of the big stack. And it might be that this smokestack with the new technology is more productive, right? But the problem is this one costs $5 million. If this one's 20 years old and it's bought and paid for and working perfectly, even though it's less productive, you don't have the $5 million price tag, right? So, but eventually maybe this one is going to wear out, poop out, fall apart, need some really expensive repairs, but maybe that won't happen for 20 years from now, right? So it might be possible that the regulation leads to long-term costs that are beneficial, but the upfront costs don't quite work. You got all these kind of complexities that come into these decisions. So again, this is a bit of a generalization. It depends on what type of cost, but certainly in the short run, we'd expect costs to be going up for the most part. That's a fair generalization. Increase in rules lead to an increase in cost. All right, so what is deregulation? Heard that, I think, during that debate. Deregulation. What are we doing with our regulations now if we are deing them? We're removing them. So just to make sure we're crystal clear, this is the removal of existing rules. The removal of existing rules, which presumably would have the opposite effect here. If there's a decrease in rules, there's a decrease in costs. And I think I'll hold off on that comment. That'll make more sense when we get to the next one. All right, so regulation, deregulation, big topics today's political campaign. So from society standpoint, we have a couple different theories on this. One is called social interest theory. Social interest theory. And social interest theory, believers, it's the theory that the political and regulatory process, served relentlessly seeks out inefficiency. And eliminates dead weight loss. So we see that there's a dead weight loss being caused by a factory, and that reason is that it's doing too much of production in a process that's polluting, and so we impose a regulation. The producer either cleans up their production process or maybe reduce the amount of product that's coming into the air or something. We're going to talk more about this, I think, our last module. And it eliminates the dead weight loss, that there was too much being produced relative to what was socially beneficial. So that is our social interest theory, basically that our system works. All right, so do you think our system works good? That sounds, I mean, in theory, that sounds good. What are some problems with this theory before I even get into what potential problems are there? By the way, it probably does work in some circumstances, for sure. Again, we need regulations, we need some rules, we need some laws. Nobody is debating that there needs to be a rule of law. But potentially, where could this kind of not do what it's intending? Political and regulatory process relentlessly seeks out these inefficiencies and removes them, eliminates dead weight loss.
Politics or
Okay, good. So the political and big companies teaming up together, right? So that coziness between big business and politicians could lead there to be regulations that are good for their buddies, right? So that could be a problem with this theory. If there was somehow independently going out and doing that, great, maybe we could do it. So that's a good one. Other things you might see wrong with this. I think there's one other big one. So the political and regulatory process relentlessly seeks out inefficiency, measures it, and eliminates it. How do they measure it? Right, I added that word measure, hoping that it would kind of ring a bell. So Kylo, you did both of those, didn't you? That's probably worth an extra credit point. All right, so nice job. Who is the engineer that's perfectly able to measure that inefficiency? That's not a simple task. That's not something like, oh yeah, I get it. Okay, well, if we do this, we'll solve the problem. Boom, done. Right? There's lots of error in the measurement. So that's another side of this. So, so let's put some problems with social interest theory. Sit. So one would be what we call capture theory. Is the first one that Kylo brought up. Capture theory. And that's so it's literally called capture theory, where businesses have incentive to try to capture those politicians to maximize profit. to get rules changed in their favor. So we call that capture theory. And so capture theory is lobbying, regulation. Keep dropping down one thing below where I want to go. So capture theory is the idea that regulation serves the self-interest of the producer, of the existing producers. Could be new producers too, I guess. There was a new area. Who capture the regulator to maximize profits. Capture theory. So my second bullet underneath this to note is rent seeking. Businesses start to engage in what economists call rent seeking. Rent seeking is lobbying for special treatment. I'm going to do another one under number 2. But right now I'm just bullet under capture theory, bullet under capture theory. So lobbying for special treatment by government, or for, I don't want to say by government, lobbying for special treatment, well, I guess it is by the government, to maximize profit. The problem with this is that it detracts from the real operations of the business. So if you are a producer of energy, you might be spending quite a bit of money to show Congress that wind energy would be a good thing for them to give money to, so that we get away from oil dependence on Saudi Arabia. Right? So we're now spending money on activities that aren't really related to my primary business. And that can be kind of seen as a waste of resources if we have people spending more money on lobbying than they're doing on producing their product. So the pharmaceutical companies are another ones that are kind of in that line. All right, so so the key point with this is they're not doing their primary, not focused 100% on their primary business. They're just looking for some handouts, rent seeking. All right, any questions or comments on that? Anybody happen to hear the latest on the Wells Fargo CEO, on what they've come back with on his pay? So the Wells Fargo was opening up these accounts. I think we mentioned in class a couple times. Wells Fargo was opening up accounts for clients to try to get more accounts, and Congress just grilled the CEO for about 4 hours, and then it just came out that Wells Fargo board, the board of directors, has suspended the CEO's pay, which is about $19.6 million, and have now put on hold or taken away, they do what's called a clawback now. Part of this CEO compensation was that the CEOs sometimes are too short-term in nature and they're not thinking about long-term. And so how most big companies have structured their pay is that they don't get paid right away, but over the next 5 to 10 years, whatever, a long period of time before they actually get some of their stock options and stuff. Well, for this guy at Wells Fargo, 41 million is being clawed back. It's called a clawback because he's earned it contingent upon things, working out right or not having situations like this. So 19.6 million paychecks suspended and 41 million of this clawback money coming back. Largest corporate clawback amount that's been done so far. So it's kind of an interesting story. Okay. And so that kind of comes in with having policies, which is what we're talking about today in regard to monopolies. Did you have a question? Or were you just having?
I heard that, I heard a rumor back during the summer beverage chips that Wells Fargo was doing.
Oh, really? No, they wouldn't be going out of business. So it's not that. It's amazing the billions that these companies can lose and still stay in business. They, some of them are just enormous. So yeah, no, Wells Fargo is still fairly solid, I think, from as far as going out of business type of standpoint. Okay, so natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly is a case where I'm sorry, you're right. I didn't come back to number 2. Sorry, that was going to be my last number 2. I missed number 2. Thank you. Number 2 was not being able to measure that efficiency. So hard to measure inefficiency. And if it's hard to measure, then that means whatever regulation you put into place might not be effective. So the amount of regulation is difficult to determine. Situation, so back to natural monopoly. Natural monopoly is a situation where economies of scale are so large that it is least costly to have only one firm serve the market. So a situation where there's economies of scale are so large that it's least costly to have only one firm serve the market. All right, so let me draw a little graph here for starters. So imagine if this is the market for electricity. And so the long-run average cost curve maybe looks like this. Long-run average cost. And just to kind of, I'm going to leave it kind of loosey-goosey a little bit, but let's say that there's currently 4 firms, 4 companies. There's 4 companies that are serving the market with 200 units of electricity. So this is the long-run average cost curve that one of those representative firms has. So there's 4 companies, each producing 200 units of electricity. So how many are in the market? How much is the market quantity? 4 firms, each doing 200, 800. Good. So one of those companies says, hey, I got an idea. What if company A and company B get together and merge? From this picture, would that be a good idea with the market being 800 units of electricity if 2 of the 4 companies got together and merged and were able to produce 400? Would that be a good idea? Right? So market forces in this case would say that, hey, if these guys can do 400 units, company A and company B get together and merge, they could drive down their average cost. If this was at $30 per kilowatt, we could bring down our cost to $20 a kilowatt. And the existing firms, C and D, we can hurt them, right? How are they gonna be able to compete with the new big firm, AB? No. And so what's that going to force C and D to contemplate? We should merge together. So now C and D merge together in order to compete with the big AB firm. And now we've got 2 companies serving the market, each with 400 units, and a nice price of $20. What's the next logical step to do? We got companies AB and companies CD. According to this data, what would they have incentive to do? Merge, right? So the economies of scale is leading towards us having just one firm producing 800. And so maybe the new single firm can drop down costs all the way down to $9 apparently. Right? Pretty nice. Average cost dropping down to $9 with one firm here. So that's what we mean by a natural monopoly, is like if we just left things alone with the invisible hand, Adam Smith, all that stuff, the companies would probably head this direction because it's profitable to do so. And so it's not due to government intervention at this point, but rather the natural process of business that leads us to having just one firm. So note, the free market, invisible hand, Adam Smith stuff, the free market invisible hand will naturally gravitate over time to one firm, one company, a monopoly. Now, this sounds good. Didn't we get price down to $9? Low prices for everybody, one company producing. Sounds like a pretty rosy deal. What's wrong with that? Yeah, we didn't even talk about price. I've just been talking about cost. So, in theory, the price could be very low and could be serving a lot of people. But in reality, with one company in the market, so now we're going to draw a new graph. So we got long run average cost, just like we did over here. And then we we have a marginal cost curve associated with this long-run average cost curve. And since long-run costs are falling, where is the marginal cost curve relative to the average cost curve? Above it or below it? Below it, right? Just like we saw before. So in other words, this thing may indeed look like this. Just like what we had, a big bowl shape. And the minimum point is somewhere over here, right? But this is at obnoxiously large levels of output that isn't relevant for the market. So we don't even draw this. The relevant range for the long-run average cost curve is here. And so we get a marginal cost curve that is going to come up eventually, dot, 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 go up, whatever, just like what we did before. But all of this section is kind of irrelevant because economies of scale dominates over the relevant ranges of production. So our marginal cost curves here. And then finally, we can add our demand curve. So if our demand curve, let's say, looks like that, we start to see people's willingness to pay for this product. With a downward sloping linear demand curve, where does the marginal revenue curve lie? Above it or below it? With a downward sloping demand curve and a single price monopoly, where does the marginal revenue curve lie relative to the demand curve? Above it or below it? Below it. And what does its shape, what's its slope relative to the demand curve? Twice, not half, that's wrong direction. It's okay to use the word half if demand is half as much as marginal revenue, but marginal revenue is twice as steep. So remember, our little trick is to take the midsection here and then draw in a marginal revenue curve. How does our natural monopolist maximize profits? You're close, and you got it off the top of your head, so that's good. How does the natural monopolist maximize profits? By producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is just equal to the cost of the last unit. Excellent, right there. Marginal revenue, marginal cost, which means our monopolist is going to maximize profits by producing QM. This is all the same story we did with the traditional monopoly model, but now we just have these weird looking cost curves here for the natural monopoly. We're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay. Where do I get that kind of information? The demand curve. The demand curve shows all the prices people are willing and able to pay for different quantities. So I go up to the demand curve, hang a left, and I learn that our monopolist is going to charge that price. All right, they're going to earn some economic profit. That profit's not going to go away due to barriers to entry. Same story we told the last 2 times now, so we're starting to get a little rolling. Okay, so this one's a little different than the other monopoly model because we have this going on. So this might be a place for government regulation. Maybe it is ideal to have one company providing electricity, right? Uh-oh, who's that? That was you, Jacob? All right, boy, we got people losing points like crazy here today. All right. Easy come, easy go. Okay, here we go. So where is the allocatively efficient production quantity? Where is the allocatively efficient production quantity? Allocative efficiency requires what condition? That's the one that you should have memorized. And this goes back to chapter 2 or 3. I think it's 3. Where demand crosses supply. Where's the supply curve? Marginal cost. So technically for allocative efficiency, it's where marginal cost and not demand technically, but it turns out to be equal to demand. What do we call it? Marginal benefit. So I kind of want you to remember that part, where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's right here. So the allocatively efficient quantity is over here. So similar to our results with the regular monopoly, is the monopolist underproducing or overproducing relative to what is allocatively efficient? Underproducing. There's not enough of the product out there because we have this over here and this over here, which means there's a dead weight loss, by the way. Okay? So if the government is relentlessly, I think I erased it already, relentlessly seeking out dead weight loss and they're going to try to correct it, one possibility might be to force the electric company to produce this quantity, QAE. So let's just say, let's say this is 1,000 units. And the market quantity, you guys can put really whatever numbers you want, but let's just call this 400 units. The monopolist is currently at 400 units and $30 a kilowatt hour, right? So our market price is 30, and we got 400 units. The government comes in and says, sorry, we got you all figured out. You have to produce 1,000 units. What's wrong with that regulation? What's wrong with that regulation? There's a problem of the government forcing the electric company to produce 1,000 units. Can I see it? Not everybody's going to be able to afford that. What are you pricing it at? Yeah. So, but is that even a possibility? Is it possible that they can keep it at 30 and sell 1,000? No. So that's not law of demand. That's not possible. So you're onto something there. At 1,000 units, what's happening to our company? It's going out of business. It's losing money. How do you know that? Good. The average cost is above the price. So the highest price people are willing and able to pay for this 1,000 units is only this amount, right? But the average cost is up here. So that means what is happening to the company? What's happening in terms of profit? They're losing money. There is no profit. There's a loss. Now, that brings up another interesting question. Can the government force a company to lose money and still make it? Is that possible? No. Are you sure? Subsidy. Can the government, now my question is though, can the government force a company to make 1,000 units and do it at a loss? Long term. Can the government do that? Government can do anything, can't they? God bless America. Da, 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 da. What can the company do if they're losing money? Shut down. They can quit, right? Can the government force the company to keep operating at a loss? Not yet. Not in the United States of America, right? So that is not possible. Hopefully that will be preserved, that we have voluntary action going on, that the government can't force the company to lose money and keep operating this business. They'll just quit, right? So if the regulation is, company, you must produce 1,000 units, it's just not feasible because there'll be a loss at that amount. All right, so let's write that out so that we're kind of carefully critiquing this. So kind of different types of regulation. So, possible regulation to decrease deadweight loss. Number one, force company to produce QAE. That's a possible regulation. So, problem, government can't force a company to produce at a loss. God bless America. You can sing it if you want as you write. Okay. So the key here is that at QAE, long run average cost is greater than price, which is what we showed here. All right, so we now got to think about, is there other ways that we can preserve a private company producing this good? Because another way this could go, that does go this way in some other countries, is that the government just takes it over. Can the government operate at a loss long term? Can the government operate at a loss long term?
They've been doing that for a while.
They've been doing it in other cases, right? U.S. Post Office kind of comes to mind for me. Do you think FedEx could handle doing the job that the U.S. Post Office does? No? Why? They couldn't grow? They couldn't take over the resources, purchase them. I mean, I'm not saying the giveaway, but they couldn't buy every single vehicle, buy all the infrastructure, buy all the machines. You don't think FedEx is smart enough to take over the U.S. Post Office? All right, so it kind of comes down to the pricing, and that the U.S. Post Office should have been gone probably 10 to 20 years ago in my opinion, but it's still hanging on. Well, Grandma's got to be able to send her letters. Well, now Grandma's on email too, right? So Grandma has plenty of opportunities to email grandkids without for free. So the whole argument of keeping low-cost mail delivery for everybody, and with the internet and the free access at the public libraries, and so, oh, you're going to hurt the poor people. No, we're not. They're going to find out, they're going to figure out a way to send what they need to send. And if they really need help, then just give them some sort of separate subsidy as opposed to the U.S. Post Office losing billions per year. So the Post Office is almost bye-bye. But that's an option that we could look at, is government takeover of this. So in order to fund the loss, what would the government need to do? It does need to be paid for. I mean, there is a true operating, what these numbers are saying. They'll raise the price to the consumers, but then we would drift away from 1,000. So they kind of face a similar problem. As they raise the price to consumers, less people are going to buy it, and QAE remains right here. So what else could they do? Since you're the government, tax something else, right? Now, when you tax something else, you're going to create an inefficiency elsewhere. So that's the pickle that they're in. But in theory, because the government's not voluntary, it's involuntary, they can set their tax rate and suck you people dry for more money to fund this activity if they think that it serves the public good. Maybe it does serve the public good. Maybe you guys need to be sucked with some money. I don't know. I'm not even trying to bring that up. Just trying to have you see the issues, right? This is all about the issues we observe that there's an operational loss that needs to be funded somehow. All right, so in the United States, God bless America, etc., we tend to prefer to try to keep a private company running it. So what are some alternatives that may not get us QAE, but may be an improvement over QM? In other words, if we can get going this way, that might be beneficial too. What are some things the government could do that would maintain a private company providing electricity? Yeah, Dylan.
Make them produce where demand meets the long run cost.
Okay, so demand equals long run average cost. That would do it, right? If we could somehow get this quantity right here, what is the economic profit of this quantity? 0, right? So the company, now, is the company really earning no money? Just to review things, no, we always include opportunity cost in with our total cost, and therefore the company is earning a normal profit, right? So economic profit is 0, they're still earning a normal profit, and that would lead to this being the new price. So if this is, let's call it QR for the regulated amount, there's a couple ways we can do that. So number 2 is we can have rate of return regulation. Rate of return regulation. Okay, so with rate of return regulation, government only allows a normal rate of return. In other words, economic profit equal to 0. So that particular regulation, if the government was monitoring the company and they said, sorry, you got to earn a 0 economic profit, then we get this price and this quantity would be the result. Rate of return, because a normal profit at this price, economic profits are 0. Now, what sort of incentives do we have now? So if you're the CEO of this company and you need a new car, right? New company car. Do you buy the Cadillac or the Chevy Cavalier? If you need a new desk at the office, do you go out and buy the nice solid wood oak desk, or do you run to Walmart and get the particle board desk? When you need new paper, do you buy that nice heavy grade paper that feels really good to the touch, or that Walmart flimsy paper that comes in nice and cheap? So what does the CEO tend to do? Caddy or Cavalier?
Yeah,
Cadillac. Oak desk, particle board. Oak desk. Good paper, bad paper. Good paper. All right? So why? What's the logic? I don't think everybody's quite on the same wavelength here. They're increasing their cost, right? So they're kind of able to profit off of the regulation the way it's stated by not watching their costs very carefully, right? They even have incentive to get nicer and nicer things, some company trips. As those costs start to rise, what happens to QR? It's starting to go down. And in fact, it's possible that the cost could rise so high that we're right back here, right? So as, let me golf club this one, as, even though it's not a curve, as our costs start to go up, our rate of return, our fair rate of return, QM, starts to drift to the left, and it's possible that the cost could be so out of line that we're actually right back to the monopoly situation anyway, right? So that's a problem with this rate of return regulation. There's no incentive to watch costs. So, problem. No incentive for firm to minimize costs. And graphically, that's going to lead to an increase in long-run average cost and a decrease in QR, moving towards QM and away from QAE, just the opposite of what we'd like to see happen. So, what might be another regulation we could try to put in here? We learned a lot of government regulations and options, tools of the government back in chapter 6. What's another thing, looking at these numbers, that would maybe be different than mandating a rate of return that might have a better result? A price ceiling, yeah. And they call it a little bit differently. I mean, it really is a price ceiling, but a price cap. So price cap regulation, absolutely right. It's just a price ceiling. If we set a price cap, let's call it P cap. If we set a price cap equal to this price here, then we should get that same result. All right, so number 3, maybe I'll try that. Number 3 is price cap regulation. And if you want to put in parentheses, it really is a price ceiling. So this is probably most common with regulated monopolies. Like utilities. They've kind of moved towards the price cap. It still has similar problems, though. The company is going to go back to the government and say, hey, the price cap's too low. You know, this isn't sustainable. Here's our books. We're being real transparent. Here's our costs. Look, we even ran to Walmart for the particle desk, for crying out loud, right? We bought the Cavalier, and this is what. Oh, by the way, I got some extra tickets to Barbados that if you wanted to go golfing, I got a course down there that you might like with your family. And I just happen to have extra tickets in there. So if you could increase this price cap for us, that would be great. Thanks, that would be great. All right? So we haven't completely eliminated the problem, that public choice theory stuff, where the raters might be able to be captured or lobbied for somehow. So we haven't completely, this isn't a silver bullet that we might not have any problems with the price cap, but it tends to be a little bit easier to monitor. And so they will negotiate on what the price cap is. The company will say, here's my cost. The price cap needs to go up this year, or whatever. So, but you can imagine, anytime we get that type of deal put together, then there could be some other potential funny business going on. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, the example regulator, is that illegal or just do they got caught doing that?
It depends. So, they've tried to clamp down on that as much as possible. So the Barbados things, there are rules that say you cannot give X amount of a valued gift to a auditor or something. Right? right? There'll be limits on the amount of gifts. In many cases, in many industries, I don't know what it would exactly be for this situation, but you certainly couldn't pull out with Barbados tickets and start whining and dining them. So that's in the last 20 years especially, that stuff has been headlines in the newspapers, and then slowly there's been rules to address that. Doctors have gotten the shaft probably the biggest out of that. So doctors, anybody have a mom or dad as a doctor or another relative? So back in the old days, I don't know how old your parents are. They might have been, since you guys are 20 years, you guys could be kind of close to my kids by now. But back in the good old days, the pharmaceutical reps used to do the Barbados thing with the docs. Hey, I've got this new drug. It works really good for asthma. And here's some Barbados tickets. And by the way, here's also some tickets to the NBA game tonight. And they would wine and dine the doctors. And there was some interesting studies in economics on how disproportionate the prescriptions were for drugs that gave better bells and whistles, right? And so that ended up coming down the pipeline pretty big, and those sorts of things. Now they're very limited on what they can do for lunch. They can still buy the doctor's lunch and kind of give them their pitch, but they don't get all the extra plush things. So a lot of that stuff has changed, which brings me to saying, if that's going on, most of that would be illegal now, the way I'm describing it. But sometimes there might be completely legal ways of why the regulator might want to be friendly. Some human biases of trying to avoid conflict, for instance, right? In general, humans don't like conflict. And so if you're going into environment, there's potential conflict. And so the regulator might be, I really could be hard on you, but since you buy me those nice lunches that are under $50 and I'm going to see you on a regular basis, you're kind of my friend, I'm not going to hit you with the book hard, right? So sometimes human biases might play a role into impacting that as well. So it depends on the circumstances, and most of it, I would say at this point in time, would be probably illegal and unethical. Okay, good question. Anything else? All right, so price cap, most common. It gives incentive for firms to minimize costs. Right? So now, all of a sudden, the Chevy Cavalier, the particle board desk, and the cheap paper all make the company more money now because their price is fixed. They have to minimize costs. The only way to maximize profits is to really minimize costs. And so that's the nice feature of it. And then let me put in the problem that still is there, is that the price cap ends up being negotiated over time. So price cap still gets negotiated over time and may not reflect social preference. I'll just leave it real broad. So market prices, on the other hand, when there's competition on both sides, one of the nice features we got is that the price was fair. The market price reflected social preferences and the values that people place on the goods and services. Okay. So these solutions are what we call second best solutions. So the price cap and the rate of return, we call second best solutions. So note, number 2 and number 3 are referred to as second best solutions. Are referred to as second solutions. And the reason is because QR is still less than QAE, but at least it's better than QM, in theory, if we don't have inflated costs. So I just put on here the quantity in the market. The regulated quantity is less than what's allocatively efficient. So that's where the second best comes in. But we still have a private company running it. It's just not feasible in a market system to get to the allocatively efficient quantity. All right. All right, so one last topic before we leave monopoly, and we're going to start monopolistic competition, which is kind of a easy transition from monopoly. We're going to think about the supply curve in monopoly.
Oh, 115.
No.
So, there is no supply in monopoly. There is no supply curve in monopoly. So this would be kind of a good way to summarize our monopoly results. All right, so draw kind of our basic long-run monopoly model, not with the natural monopoly, but the regular old monopoly. Uh-oh, you're done? That you? Oh, that was you. Alarm. Oh. Is this when you normally wake up? Or you like? All right. So marginal revenue is below the demand curve is twice as steep. We don't have to draw it below. Let's just end it right there. Marginal revenue. This is the way you'll usually see it in your homework problems anyway. All right, and then you've got a marginal cost curve that's upward sloping. And in perfect competition, marginal cost curve equaled supply. Remember going through that last week? So the supply curve was the marginal cost curve. In monopoly, it's not though. So put the little knot through there. So that relationship is broken. Now, what is a supply curve? As the price of a good goes up, the quantity supplied goes. Which one are we doing? Supply again? The price of a good goes up, quantity supplied goes up, ceteris paribus. That's our law of supply. So that's a supply relationship. And with perfect competition, remember, as the price went up, price was equal to marginal revenue. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So if price goes up, I supply more. I supply more. And so the marginal cost curve was the supply curve in perfect competition. In this case, it's not. So why not? Well, marginal cost equals marginal revenue here. So the monopolist is going to produce that quantity. And they're going to charge this price. Yeah. right, so this one's a little tricky to draw, but this represents quantity supplied and the price that the monopolist does, right? So we're close to having that. So what comes in is when we change the price, or if price changes. And so this is where it's a little tricky to draw. So watch me draw it first. If the demand curve looked like this instead, let's call it D2 and MR2. Right? So D2 and MR2. Now go ahead and try to draw that. Just put the marginal revenue curve kind of cutting through. We're going to make the demand curve more elastic. So it did on us. It kind of rotated and shifted down, which it's subject to do, depending on what's going on in the marketplace. The quantity stays the same, but the price just drops. So this is P2 for the monopolist. So we don't have that same relationship between price and quantity supplied because the monopolist is choosing the price, right? They're setting the price. They are a price maker, not a price taker. So if, and maybe you don't need to draw at all, but if the demand curve moved here to D3, and then this one comes down somewhere down here, MR3, we have an increase in quantity and a price here. So price went down, quantity stayed the same, quantity went up, price went up, but possibly price went down, quantity went up, right? So there's no systematic relationship there between price and quantity is kind of the key takeaway. So, key point. The monopolist is a price maker, not a price taker. And determines price according to marginal revenue and marginal cost. And the bottom line is price and quantity supplied do not follow the marginal cost curve. Because I kept the marginal cost curve the same here the whole time, and we get different price and quantity combinations. All right, we are done with monopoly. Time to start a little monopolistic competition. So back to our spectrum of competition. Perfect competition. Last week's stuff. Monopoly at the other end. No competition. Perfect competition. No competition. The real world is between these two extremes. Like almost 99.9% of the stuff out there is somewhere between those two. Maybe not 99.9, but probably 99% is somewhere in between. So remember, we think of these endpoints and their characteristics so that we can start to develop some predictions on how situations might evolve, depending on what their circumstances are. Monopolistic competition is the next chapter, chapter 14. And on the spectrum, it's actually closer to perfect competition than it is monopoly. Despite the name, monopolistic competition sounds like it's closer to monopoly maybe, I think. But it's actually over here, monopolistic competition. And here are the three characteristics. Number one, we've got lots of competitors, large number of firms. Large number of firms. Number two, free entry and exit. So far, what is it sounding closer to, monopoly or perfect competition? Perfect competition, right? So what was the last characteristic for perfect competition? Homogeneous product, right? The no barriers is this one. The free entry exit is the no barriers part. So it was homogeneous product. All the companies were identical products. And so that's what we're going to loosen up now, is we're going to have a heterogeneous product. And we also use the word differentiated. So a heterogeneous product means the products from different firms, are differentiated. Now that's kind of a weird word that we don't use all the time. Differentiated. What's that implying? Similar but different, right? Good. So similar but different. And in terms of our demand shifters and the elasticity of demand, if you have products that are similar but different, what are they? Substitutes is what I was looking for, right? So we got substitute goods, products that are differentiated. So what are ways firms differentiate? Ways to differentiate. So now we can start to think about real world companies. How do they differentiate their goods? Think of some goods. How do they differentiate themselves? Brand name, good. What else?
Claims.
Okay, so the claims of their products, so claims of quality maybe? Would that be fair to say? Kind of falls into that line, the claims of quality?
Looks.
What's that?
The way the product looks.
The way the product looks, yeah. So it might be a cell phone, but if it's a cell phone with that little curve thing or a flexi phone, you know, whatever. So if we start thinking about cell phones, the looks of it, the design could be important. Even if the functionality could be identical, but just simply the looks. Good. What else? Price. So what is driving the price? Okay, so differences in quality usually. So I like to be careful with price, and actually I'd kind of like to loosely cross that off, just because I think it helps our mind a little bit better. You're absolutely right, they differentiate on price, but part of that is due to these other things. The way it looks might have been more costly, right? The advertising that I did might have been more costly. And so the differentiate on price is not purely price alone. However, higher priced goods tend to signal what in terms of quality? Better. But as we know and we've learned, that's not always the truth. Okay, other things. Quantity. Now, quantity is kind of a loaded one too. But the packaging, like if you put more units per in the package maybe, which might play into it. So that might be on packaging and positioning. All right, we will pick up there on Friday. By the way, this is one of the shortest chapters. So this one we will wrap up and we'll probably get into oligopoly on Friday.
Cold now. Where's Jacob? Jacob, I don't know.